With Andrew Marr.
Good evening. It feels tonight as if Western Europe is heading towards an economic Cold War with the United States over Greenland. The good news, if there is any, is that Donald Trump said explicitly earlier on he would not use military force to seize the Danish territory. The less good news is that he didn't back off at all on the principle, insisting Greenland was part of North America and US territory.
So we want a piece of ice for world protection, and they won't give it. We've never asked for anything else, and we could have kept that piece of land, and we didn't. So they have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember.
Now, many of us, including me actually, had lazily assumed that Donald Trump would arrive at the Davos summit in Switzerland in a more emollient mood, ready to give and take. In fact, he was extremely aggressive about energy, about Western Europe, and about Greenland. The emperor was not to be interrupted or gainsayed. It's hard to be sure what happens next. Either the EU, the Danes, and we ourselves are going to have to bend the knee and allow Trump to grab Greenland, or else it's economic war. This is the best news that Vladimir Putin has had since the collapse of the USSR. Meanwhile, in London, something significant happened at Prime Minister's Questions today. Keir Starmer, after a year of biting his tongue about Donald Trump, said this.
President Trump deployed words on Chagos yesterday that were different to his previous words of welcome and support when I met him in the White House. He deployed those words yesterday for the express purpose of putting pressure on me and Britain in relation to my values and principles on the future of Greenland. Mr. Speaker, he wants me to yield on my position, and I'm not going to do so.
He'd been challenged by Kemi Badenoch about Trump's attack on the Chagos Islands deal. The Prime Minister didn't reply to her about that at all, but he looked and sounded angrier than I have ever seen him before in the chamber, and made it thoroughly clear he believed that Trump had been trying to bully him and that he had had enough. Where that leads him and us, it's hard to say. Now, these are such extraordinary days that perhaps it wasn't surprising to read from a Toronto newspaper that Canada's military has been planning a response in case of a US invasion there. Let's talk first tonight to Michael Ignatieff, the writer and former leader of Canada's Liberal Party in opposition. Michael, great to have you on the show. Is there a sense in Canada that Greenland first, Canada next?
We certainly hope not. But look, we have a real issue here, which is the Northwest Passage over the top of Canada is regarded by Canada as an inland waterway. Yeah. We own both sides of it. The United States has always believed, actually, it's an international waterway. And if you think this is a forgettable issue, don't, because this is going to be, as the world warms, one of the chief transit points for global commerce between Asia and Europe. And who owns it, who has control of it, is going to be central. And you asked me, Greenland first, us second. Where I think the pressure point might come is over the Northwest Passage. And we used to have a kind of agree to disagree agreement with the United States. We felt one thing, they felt the other. We agreed to disagree. I don't think there's space left for that kind of relationship between the United States anymore. No, I don't think they're coming across the border. No, I don't think they're going to use force. But I think Canada, as a responsible state, has to make contingency plans for the unthinkable.
Speaking of which, we read this report that the Canadian military have been, as it were, wargaming what to do if the Americans do come across the border. Now, they have a vast, vast military compared to you, and I think the war games concluded, I'm sorry to say this so brutally, but you'd lost about 2 days, and it's then into kind of guerrilla warfare like the Afghans and others. This is the stuff of a really badly written sort of sci-fi book. It's extraordinary that this is being taken seriously.
Yes, but you have to, I think, measure up how long this has been going on. He's been in office for a year. Almost the minute he got into power, He began to call us the 51st state, called our prime minister a governor, as if he was the governor of a state, and on and on. This was a galvanic shock. It's as if, I don't know, he said, actually, we own Britain and you're a province of the United States. It would have the same galvanic shock in Britain that it had in Canada. And it elected Mark Carney. Mark Carney would not be the Prime Minister of Canada had he not had this gentle nudge from Donald Trump. And we are where we are in a rediscovery of the cost of our dependence on the United States and our determination to reduce that dependency in any way we can, which is why Mark Carney is in Beijing one day and he's going to be in Delhi soon, and then he's in Qatar to build trade relationships that reduce our dependence on a sovereign, an emperor, who's simply no longer to be trusted.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned trade there. It does look as if Western Europe and Canada and other countries are inevitably heading towards a kind of tariff and trade war again with the United States. Now, there's lots of arguments about the United States debt being held by others and how that would go. What's your impression of what's ahead?
Well, I think Europe has foreclosed one option already. My sense is that in the summer of 25, the EU signed a very disadvantageous kind of cave-in to the Americans, and I think discovered that they got nothing from it. I think that closes off the options for giving in. I think they now have to accept that we may be in a Trump economic war for quite some time. It could be painful. It could be very difficult. European economies are extremely dependent on the American market, but this is now existential. You simply can't have a power like this threaten the United States. So I think there will be pushback, and I think Carney's speech at Davos last night was a signal from Carney that he understands, in the Canadian context, free trade with the United States is dead. I think Europeans are waking up to that realization and realizing that only counter tariffs are going to work here. And so, buckle up, folks. This is going to be a very, very nasty, unpleasant ride, and it will put great strain on all European governments and on the capacity of electorates, including the British electorate, to stand the pain.
Michael Ignatieff, a very important, if slightly chilling, warning from you. Thank you so much for talking to LBC. Now, the Trump speech was long and rambling and made huge numbers of assertions. And I'm afraid it is now essential that we fact-check a few of those. And to do so, I'm joined now by Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent, who was listening in. Simon, just get us going. Apparently, Iceland is part of this big trouble now. Can you explain why the president kept talking about Iceland? Was he just making a mistake? Was he getting two countries mixed up?
Well, I think he was just making a mistake. Yeah, I think he was just making a mistake, Andrew. I think that because he had referred to his ask as simply for a piece of ice, a small piece of ice, by that he meant Greenland, he then confused the two countries in his own mind, and on a couple of separate occasions referenced Iceland when he meant clearly Greenland. I mean, the most breathtaking factual assertion that I think was falsely made during the course of this speech was his claim that Greenland at the end of World War II was part of North America. I mean, he once again advanced this notion that the United States is laying claim to the Western Hemisphere, and he indicated that after the United States had put military bases on Greenland soil during the Second World War, in his mind somehow that means that America owned Greenland at the end of the Second World War and then handed it over to Denmark, and that was a terrible mistake that he is simply now trying to correct. It's part of North America, it's our territory, he said. I mean, that is flatly untrue.
On the same basis,
at no point did the United States control Greenland.
I was going to say, on the same basis, Suffolk would be part of American territory today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that it was, as I say, it was quite a long and rambling speech, but 500 years worth of oil and gas still under the North Sea. I think that would be a surprise to a lot of oil companies.
Yes, an enormous surprise to them. But I mean, once again, the American president sort of flaying Keir Starmer's government for not allowing further exploration in the North Sea. This is an issue that he voiced, of course, when he was in the UK last year for that second state visit. And it's an issue that he voices again and again, as he also says that if European nations, including the UK, don't control illegal immigration into their nations, they will soon be dead. And that's why I think the broader context of this speech, filled with falsehoods as it was reminding European voters that when they next get a chance, they ought to be embracing political parties that favour his kind of solutions to their domestic issues. And by that, of course, the government here means, in the UK context, Reform UK.
One final question, Simon. There have been reports that senior Republicans have been warning Donald Trump's White House that if he did go ahead with military action in Greenland, that would be the end of his presidency. How seriously do you take those reports?
Well, I think they should be taken very seriously, not least because some of them were actually articulated publicly by senior Republicans last weekend, including a couple on America's TV Sunday shows. The fact that Donald Trump today said, whether he means it or not, that he's not going to go forward with military action to seize Greenland, I think is partly in response to that critique, because those Republicans didn't say taking Greenland through a negotiated acquisition would be the end of your presidency. They specifically said the use of military force. And I think that Donald Trump, at least moving it slightly off the front burner, because I don't think he was taking it away completely, was responding to that.
What days we're living through. Simon, thank you very much indeed. Trying to understand him psychologically has never been more important. So let's hear now from Donald Trump's longtime associate, former lawyer, creator of the Substack platform, The Real Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen. Mr. Cohen, great to have you on the show. We're trying to work out around the world how seriously to take Donald Trump when he says we are going to get Greenland one way or the other. As someone who knows the man quite well, what's your view?
Yeah. As it relates to Trump and a desire, when he has his eyes set on something, there is nothing that is going to stop him from acquiring what it is that he so desires, whether it's a piece of property for a golf course, whether it is a building, or whether it is a territory of ice. It makes no difference. When he says that he wants it, what he did say, and I think it's important for people to note, he said excessive military force. Now, I listened to part of your previous guest when he said that there are Republicans that have said if you try to use the military within which to seize Greenland, that would be impeachable. You know, we've heard that sort of impeachment rhetoric many times here in the States, in fact, on 2 impeachment trials, neither of which were successful. And I strongly believe very much that if he ended up using not extreme, as he said, because he won't need to use extreme with 57,000 inhabitants, maybe 60,000 military, which doesn't seem to be too extreme in his mind.
So he could do that. Let me ask you perhaps a more sensitive question. Listening to him giving that, frankly, very long and rambling address in Davos, he made some really extraordinary mistakes, like confusing Greenland and Iceland, the kind of thing that if President Biden had done would have caused sort of comment around the world. Do you think he is losing?
No, they would have had Biden. They would have had Andrew Biden in a straitjacket going for a mental cognitive test.
So, I mean, I guess the obvious question is, do you think, he said gently, that the president is losing it a bit?
No. You know, remember, what happened was they were on the Air Force One. There seemed to have been some form of an electrical problem. They had to turn around, believe it or not. And so he'd been on a flight for a very long time, landed in Davos at 2:00 for a 2:30 speech. I think he made a mistake. And in one sentence, he used Iceland 3 times instead of Greenland. I don't think that there is a cognitive issue. It's just a mistake.
And again, you've followed his ups and downs for a long, long time. He appears to be a president really almost unique in modern times in America because he is without constraints.
Zero constraint. In fact, somehow they have managed, and again, this is the mistake of the American people. This is not something that we should not have expected, Andrew. Project 2025 calls for exactly what Donald Trump is doing. It's not as if they hid this nefarious desire. It's put out there in a 922-page manifesto that is designed within which to destroy America's democratic republic, plain and simple. And for whatever the reason, Andrew, they've decided that this is the guy that they wanted to do it. He has crippled Congress. He controls Congress. And in fact, he controls many of the courts, including the Supreme Court of the United States.
So it's to replace the old democratic American system by an imperial and expansionist presidency.
Well, that certainly seems the way that it's going, doesn't it? Because first it's Panama, now it's Venezuela, then you also have Canada, you have Greenland. I mean, it's not one or two places, Mexico. I mean, he makes these very bold statements on what was always known as the sphere of influence. You know, the sphere of influence, depending upon who's the strongest in that hemisphere, has the right to everything. That's what he believes.
Michael Cohen, I'm very much looking forward to doing a reassuring interview with you at some point. But for now, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, Trump's making huge waves internationally, but the controversy over his immigration agency, ICE, is still rumbling on at home. More about that next. By the time now, 6:18.
This is LBC, both global player and the new LBC app.
6:19. If European leaders are feeling threatened by Donald Trump tonight, just imagine how it feels for many Americans waiting for his ICE paramilitaries to knock at the door. Let's hear now from Mehdi Hassan, the British-born, US-based broadcaster and founder of the media company Zeteo. Mehdi, great to have you on the show. Your reaction, first of all, to what you've heard from Donald Trump today, backing down from actual military involvement against a fellow member of NATO, but saying we're going to take Greenland one way or the other. You just watch us.
Andrew, great to be back. Well, first of all, I'd say that if I was in Iceland, I'd be a little bit worried today because he refused to call it Greenland. The script that he had in front of him on the prompter referred to Greenland as a piece of ice. And Donald Trump, being Donald Trump, demented Don, as some call him now, at 79 years old, a man who's losing coherence by the day. Not that he had that much to begin with. He referred to it as Iceland multiple times. I keep thinking to myself, if Joe Biden had done this, the media would have gone crazy about Joe Biden's dementia. And yet Donald Trump, day after day, rambles incoherently, slurs his speech. Yesterday, he told a long story about his mother wanting him to be a professional baseball player. And today, he's sitting in Davos saying, we're going to take Iceland. So the Icelandic government should probably have a word with him as well. But look, with Donald Trump, Andrew, I think the British are finally waking up to what we Americans have to deal with every day. I think the rest of the world is... Nothing he says is consistent. The fact that he says he doesn't want to militarily do it today doesn't mean he won't say the exact opposite tomorrow. With Trump, it's what side of bed has he gotten out of, who's the last person to have spoken to him, what's annoyed him. Today in his speech, Andrew, he talked about how the Swiss prime minister, whose name he couldn't remember, apparently called him up and she rubbed me up the wrong way. So this is who Trump is. He's a man driven by petty grievances, impulses. There really is no ideology. Next week he might stop talking about Greenland, or he might send troops.
Let me ask you about the sending of troops inside the United States, because ICE may be in his head for another reason as well.
Yes.
And, we've seen some extraordinary scenes from Minnesota. I'd be very interested in your view about what the atmosphere is like domestically as ICE goes into city after city after city, and governors all over the country seem to be protesting about it.
What's so interesting, Andrew, is that one of the issues that Donald Trump consistently led on, even when he was in the wilderness during the Biden years, was on immigration, on the border. You look at the polling, Republicans always led Democrats on immigration issues. Now it's changed. He's underwater on immigration in the polls. The vast majority of the American public are not happy with how he's handling it. They're not happy with what ICE is doing. Americans can see on their phones, on their TV screens, what is happening in major cities. They are seeing a white woman, not a black or brown woman, a white Christian American citizen shot dead in cold blood on the streets of a major American city. We now have, I think, a plurality of Americans saying that they support abolishing ICE, which was unheard of a few years ago. That was seen as a crazy far-left position that the Democrats should drop. And now you have a plurality of Americans saying they want to get rid of ICE. So he is deeply unpopular on this issue, but he's doubling down. Just today, Andrew, ICE has turned up in Maine, in a new state, in a new city, to try and terrorize local communities communities, especially the Somali community that Donald Trump yesterday called a low IQ community. Last month he called them garbage. So they're really terrorizing some of these black and brown communities and American citizens, Andrew. Yesterday, one of the police chiefs in Minneapolis said that his own off-duty police officers who are Latino or African American were being stopped by ICE agents with guns drawn. They're drawing guns on fellow law enforcement who they think are illegal immigrants. So this is where we've got to now with ICE. As you say, it's his paramilitary force. It's loyal to Trump. They've dropped all the training standards, Andrew. You can join ICE very easily with no training, with no substantive drills or health tests or background checks. And you could put on a mask and go out onto American streets and harass American citizens. And that's unheard of in this country in modern times.
Even so, Mehdi, I will pass on that opportunity. But in the end, again, I'm sorry to put this so crudely, but it's about the colour of skin a lot of the time. And I'd just be very interested in your own feeling. You were mentioning the Somali community who have been absolutely lambasted again and again by President Trump. But it does seem anybody who is not the right colour has to think a little 2 or 3 times. You know, your surname is Hassan. How do you feel? Do you feel completely safe wandering around the States at the moment?
No, nobody who is a non-white person feels completely safe, and no one who's a naturalized citizen, as I am. They're talking about denaturalizing citizens. There's a bill in Congress, Andrew, to denaturalize anyone who's been a citizen for 10 years or less if they support terrorism. And the Trump definition of supporting terrorism means speaking out in a way they don't like on a domestic issue or on a Middle East-related issue. So we are living in very worrying times for minority communities. But as I said, with Trump, it's now gone beyond minority communities. Like people like me were saying, look what they're doing to Somalis or look what they're doing to Muslims for years. But when you have a white woman, Renee Good, in Minneapolis, shot in cold blood, that's a line crossed for a lot of Americans. They didn't think it would be a white American citizen woman being shot by ICE who just dropped her kid to school. And that's a reminder that this entire expansion of ICE, by the way, Andrew, ICE is now bigger than most of the world's militaries, right? I think it's if it was a military, it'd be the 13th biggest in the world in terms of budget. He's expanded the budget from $6 billion 10 years ago to $85 billion. And this is his personal paramilitary force. And this will be used, for example, during the midterms, Andrew. I have no doubt that when people go to vote, especially in black and brown areas, there will be ICE agents out at the polling stations to intimidate them. That is the goal here. This has gone way beyond illegal immigration or even race relations. It's now just his militia force.
Mehdi, speaking of white women speaking out against Donald Trump, we had Mary Trump on the show yesterday, and she thought that it was perfectly possible that Trump would actually pull some of those midterm elections if he thought he was going to lose them, never mind intimidating voters. What's your view?
Yeah, I think anything is possible, unfortunately. I know people talk about Trump derangement syndrome and alarmism on the left, but, you know, this man is who he says he is. This is what he did. When I said in 2019, I wrote a column saying if he loses the election, he won't leave, I was laughed at. People said to me, this is hyperbole, this is alarmism. That's not how it works in America. You're from England, you don't understand. And yet, the following year, he refused to leave and incited an armed insurrection at the Capitol. So, look, anything is possible. Just today in Davos, he again said, sometimes you need a dictator. He keeps talking about the need for a dictator. The other day, he talked about cancelling elections, said, well, I'm not going to do it. Well, the fact that you're having to deny it is quite worrying, given no one's ever stopped them before. Look, whether they cancel elections, postpone elections, clearly he's not interested in free and fair elections. They're already trying to access social security data for voters. They're already trying to gerrymander states in a way that we haven't seen on an epic level across the country. So, look, and he's behaving, Andrew. What's so worrying, Andrew, you and I know, when a politician is this unpopular, he has one of his lowest approval ratings yesterday on his 1 year in office, you think to yourself, well, why aren't they having a relaunch? Why aren't they pivoting to get back public opinion? The fact that they don't care at all about how unpopular they are really does worry me, because it makes me think, well, maybe they don't care about elections going forward.
Well, indeed, I thought I had enough things to worry about already tonight, but you've just added to the list, Mehdi Hassan. Thank you very much indeed for that. Now, I've been talking a lot tonight about the possibility of a kind of economic Cold War breaking out. And the latest news is that the EU agreed today to freeze indefinitely the European-US trade deal they'd struck last summer. An agreement had been reached, but it still required formal implementation by the European Parliament. That's not going to happen. So where might this go next? Let's hear now from Bloomberg's chief political correspondent and co-host of Bloomberg Surveillance, Anne-Marie Horden, who is joining us from Davos. Anne-Marie, thank you very much indeed for that. I'd like you to explain to people where we might be going in terms of some kind of trade conflict between Western Europe and the United States.
Good evening, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me. I lived in the UK actually for about 8 years before I moved back to the United States. So I'm a huge fan. I would just say that, there's been a lot of consternation here on the ground between the European leaders, and they felt like this is really an existential threat when it comes to Greenland. And the Treasury Secretary made sure that when he stepped foot in Davos, one of the first comments he was going to make was about what was going on in financial markets. We saw a huge pushback about what was going on with Greenland because it wasn't just about national security now. The president was upping the threat, talking about more of a tariffs. And we do know financial markets definitely don't like the whiff of tariffs. They thought that was behind us last year. And he said this reminded him of Liberation Day hysteria. Everyone needs to calm down and take a deep breath. And then as the week sort of progressed up until the president's speech today, I think what you saw, at least in financial markets, them start to view what Trump was doing as a negotiating tactic. He said that he wants to be here for serious negotiations about Greenland. And he said, I will not use force and I don't want to use force. But to your point about where this leads the trade agreement, while the president was speaking, we got that news that the legal implementation of the deal he struck with the European Union, remember Ursula von der Leyen went to Scotland to meet him last summer, that is on pause because Greenland has now become the dark cloud over the transatlantic trade agreement. And I think until you have the European Union leaders, it's a physical meeting. They're all rushing back to Brussels to make this meeting to discuss Greenland. Until that issue they feel secure and settled with, I don't think we're going to be able to move forward with the agreement the president struck with Ursula von der Leyen and the continent last year.
Which does take us towards a kind of trade and tariff war, because as things stand, I assume that the extra 10% tariffs coming on next month that Donald Trump talked about, and then 25% tariffs if the issue isn't sorted in the early summer, those are going to happen. And now there are...
Potentially.
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I would just say potentially, because the tone of the speech in terms of individuals who are looking this purely from a trade economic perspective did feel like the president was taking it down a notch, that he was using this, trying to anchor this conversation to the extreme and using this moment to open up that negotiation. And if that is the case, there is potentially an off-ramp to do something with Greenland on a national security concern. The United States talks about, other individuals in Europe have spoken about as well. How do you beef up security of the Arctic? And then the tariffs might just go away, and then Brussels and Washington could salvage that agreement.
A little glint of light on the horizon. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for that. Up next, Trump also slammed the Green New Deal and the UK's failure to make the most of the oil in the North Sea. Is he right? I'll be talking to an energy minister in just a few minutes, but the time now is 6:30, and Amelia Cox has you.
Speaker, just say, play LBC.
6:33. Let's turn next to another part of the Trump attack on Britain and the rest of Europe, the stupid people, he calls them, buying wind farms from China and not exploiting the oil and gas of the North Sea. Before we get a response from the Energy Minister, Martin McCluskey, let's get a little flavour of Trump on what he calls the greatest hoax of all time.
The United Kingdom produces just 1/3 of the total energy from all sources that it did in 1999. Think of that, 1/3. And they're sitting on top of the North Sea, one of the greatest reserves anywhere in the world, but they don't use it. And that's one reason why their energy has reached catastrophically low levels with equally high prices. High prices, very low levels. Think of that, 1/3. And you're sitting on top of the North Sea. And they like to say, well, you know, that's depleted. It's not depleted. It's got 500 years. They haven't even found the oil. The North Sea is incredible. They don't let anybody drill. Environmentally, they don't let them drill.
Martin McCluskey, welcome. 1/3, is that true?
Look, I think what the president said there, I'd just like to pick up on one thing, which is there is obviously production going on in the North Sea at the moment. Oil is being extracted from the North Sea. But over the last 20 years, we've seen a decline in the amount of production in the North Sea, not because of necessarily government policy, but because industry has decided that that is a declining basin.
He says there's 500 years worth of oil and gas under the North Sea.
I think President Trump sometimes uses kind of big numbers and sort of inflates it. The North Sea has been declining now for since 2003. And even if we restarted, the levels of production that President Trump is talking about, we would still be a net importer. And the clean energy mission that the government has, clean energy by 2030, is all about moving us away from oil and gas and being reliant on countries like Russia and others, because we need to stand on our own 2 feet when it comes to our energy security, and that's why clean power is so important.
of course, there is oil and gas there that we could be going after. Does he not have a point that when it comes to, as it were, sitting on this great resource, we could be doing more there, and an awful lot of people in Scotland would be quietly cheering him on when it comes to North Sea oil and gas jobs?
We've been quite clear that the oil and gas sector has, decades of work in it in terms of the North Sea, and the government's not stepping away from that. But we obviously have taken the decisions that we've taken in terms of new licences. But we need to ensure there's a just transition for people. You mentioned those workers. I'm a Scottish MP. I understand why that's so important. But we're also seeing billions and billions of pounds of investment into clean energy in Scotland. We had £65 billion of investment since the election UK-wide. We had the auction round last week. This is the future. We need to make sure we take advantage of that opportunity.
Let me ask about the green energy, because if there is one thing Donald Trump hates more than anything else, it's a windmill. And he says we in the West, not just Britain, but across Western Europe, we're all suckers, we're all idiots, because we're buying Chinese windmill technology. The Chinese themselves aren't using windmills, they're using coal and oil and gas.
And solar. And lots of solar and lots of clean energy.
But they're not using windmills. They're selling it to the idiot Europeans.
Well, you look at the solar output in China most recently. They are growing their renewable energy generation. They're electrifying their economy. So, China sees the opportunity for themselves in that as well. We are taking a decision in the national interest of our country to invest in clean energy. And we're also taking action to make sure that the supply chain, more of the domestic supply chain, provides the turbines, provides the heat pumps that we're talking about today, for example, through the Warm Homes Plan. We've got a target in there for 70% of heat pump manufacture to be in the United Kingdom by 2035. So we're really pushing to make sure that as much as possible of that manufacture happens in the United Kingdom.
We saw a distinctly new tone from the Prime Minister in the House of Commons, I thought, today. Donald Trump's trying to twist my arm. I'm having nothing to do with it. Would you welcome that new tone? Do you think this is how we should be standing up to Trump?
I think it was really clear that the Prime Minister was acting, as he has done in the relationship with President Trump all the way through his time in government, acting in our national interest. He is taking decisions to make sure that we get the best deal for people who live in this country. And we have a strong economic and security partnership with the United States. But when we disagree on things, we're going to tell them that we disagree on it. And on this instance, with Greenland, with how some of our NATO allies are being treated, with the attacks on NATO, we need to make sure that we are standing up to President Trump in order to act in our national interest.
Martin McCluskey, thank you very, very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you.
Let's turn next to one of the greatest injustices in modern Britain, which is the way we are treating younger people. It's perhaps not surprising that the latest figures show that almost 1 million younger Britons are not in work or education. This week, the former Health Secretary, Alan Milburn, launched an investigation into what's going wrong and what can be done about it. And he came into the studio to give me the details.
Well, we're going to have a review. We're going to have a proper inquiry. We'll produce a diagnostic report, what is going on, and then we'll have a solutions report, what's the answer. But in the meantime, what's fascinating about this is since we started, I don't know how people get my email address or my telephone number, but they do. And I'm flooded with people, whether they're local authorities, mayors, employers, football clubs, who are actually wanting to do something about this.
And you've put out a call for evidence. I'm not sure if this is a mistake in the official press release, but it says that it closes on the 30th of January 2026. That gives everybody 10 days to get in touch.
So I think it went out slightly earlier than that. So there's a lot of evidence around, okay, which is great. So we'll look at that, both from this country, what's worked, what hasn't worked, but also from abroad. And in the meantime, what I want to do is I want to activate people. People really care about this. It's a visceral issue. So when I start talking about the NEET population, 1 million young people who are not in education, employment and training, I think it's a nose to a wider story about what's happening to this generation, and people are concerned about that.
I'm glad you said that, because in terms of what's the real story here, if you look at a young person coming out of education at the moment and looking around at the jobs market, almost no chance of getting a home of their own.
Yes.
Almost no chance of having a career for life. And you've got AI stomping around, munching up their future. And many of them, I suspect, may think, do you know what? It's not worth it. Getting into employment in the old-fashioned sense, as parents and grandparents did, the deal is no longer worth it.
So I think there was a contract, which you and I grew up with, at the heart of society. I was brought up to believe by my mum, if you put in effort, you get a reward. Okay, that's how it worked. We were very lucky. We were the socially mobile generation, were we not? And so that contract about putting in effort, getting a reward, that's broken. And it's particularly broken for this cohort of 964,000 people. And the problem is, you've got a problem on the so-called supply side. education, skills, employment support, mental health, welfare isn't working, and it's plunging people on a downward escalator into a lifetime on benefits, not in work. And what we've got to do is reverse that, an upward escalator, to provide more opportunities for young people.
I think about a quarter of the 946,000 people who are not in employment or work or training are on benefits, on health benefits in particular. Do you believe that a lot of people are going on to health benefits as a way of avoiding work?
No, I don't think it is that. I think what is happening is that there's something going on with mental health in the country amongst this generation of young people.
And again, perhaps not surprisingly, given they've had COVID and given the challenges they face now.
Indeed, but we've got to get under the skin of that and try to understand what is going on. 1 in 5 young people who are not in education, employment and training are reporting either a mental health condition or a neurodiverse condition, ADHD or autism. Half of young people are reporting some sort of health condition when they become NEET. But the really worrying thing is both that, and that trend line's getting worse. The number of young people getting health and disability benefits has doubled in just 5 years. But here's the worrying thing. 61% of those 964,000 people are economically inactive. In other words, they're completely detached from the world of work. They're not even looking for a job. So there's a problem on the supply side and on the demand side. Are employers making it more possible for young people to be recruited, or are they not? So we've got to look at the role of employers, not just the role of government.
Some people say that there is a kind of fashion around ADHD and autism, and it's become a kind of obsession of young people. And the undercurrent is that therefore it's perhaps not real, that there's a sort of suggestion it's not quite real. What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's a good idea to start with a proposition that we just blame young people somehow. That is not the starting point. I believe every young person has got potential in some way, shape or form. The question is, have we got the system set up on the supply side, on the demand side, such that potential is capable of being realised? This is a crisis. It's a sort of existential crisis for the country. What I tell people, 1 million young people, 1 in 8 of all of our young people, and the numbers are getting worse, not better, who are not looking for work, are not in training, not in education. People are genuinely shocked. It's one of these, crisis is a bit of an overused word. It's one of these silent crises that has crept up on us, but we can't allow it to go on fiscally. We can't allow it to go on economically. Above all else, we can't allow it to go on socially.
And there's a sense of urgency about this, because people who are not in work of any kind at all will lose the ability to work, frankly, lose the habit, they'll lose the self-discipline, and that will affect them for the rest of their lives.
Yes, so there's a scarring issue. So if you're not looking for work in your 20s because you've given up for whatever reason, and maybe you're not incentivized to go into work, and employers are maybe not incentivized to employ young people, we've got to look at these issues. That lasts beyond your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and you maybe earn, you lose £1 million worth of earning power over a lifetime. That's one thing.
And the economy will lose a good worker.
Yeah, and also it's something about the purpose of work. Everything that I've been able to do in my life has been about work. It's the same for you. We've got purpose through work.
Yeah.
And there's a risk, I think, sometimes in the debate that we're getting to this very strange place where people are almost saying, well, okay, work's bad for your mental health. And of course, work can be stressful, but we've got to turn that round. Work is fundamentally good for your mental health compared to lack of work.
I don't know how I would cope without work. Alan, at the end of this, is there going to be a grand report with a series of hard-edged recommendations for Keir Starmer to pick up?
Yes. For Keir Starmer to pick up, for the government to pick up. I've said, look, this report, there's no point in doing it. There's no point in being independent and getting somebody like me to look at it. And I'm looking across the span of public policy, from schools all the way into welfare. How do we create more opportunities for young people? Recommendations for government, sure, but also recommendations for employers, mayors, local authorities, because everybody has a part to play in this.
I'm quite excited about this. I do hope you come back to talk to us when you've got your report. Alan Milburn, thank you very much indeed.
Very happy to do so.
Coming up, the Labour government promised leasehold reform in the 2024 manifesto, but they seem to be wobbling after property investors weighed in. Could this be the next U-turn? Time now, 6:44.
Coming up at 7 tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:46. Angela Rayner, the former Deputy Prime Minister, broke cover this week to call on the government to stand firm on its election promise to limit ground rents for property leaseholders. The pledge faces a backlash from property investors, which is beginning to divide cabinet ministers. Our Deputy Political Editor, Aggie Schombre, has been doing some digging on this. Aggie, first of all, Angela Rayner herself, she's been very, very quiet since she left government, and she's suddenly popping back up again.
Indeed, this is one of the first issues that she's popping back up on. Obviously, it was something that was very much within her brief. And as you mentioned in the Labour manifesto, the wording was, "We will tackle unregulated and unaffordable ground rent charges." And I think Angela Rayner was aware, as I and as you are now too, that basically there is a wobble about this in government. And effectively, the Ministry of Housing are very, very pro capping ground rents for leaseholders.
That's Steve Reid.
That's Steve Reid's department, exactly. And his minister is very, very in favour of this. And apparently other departments too in favour of this, apart from the Treasury. So
Rachel Reeves, Steve Reid, Rachel Reeves, that's where the fissure is.
That's where the tension is, exactly. So Angela Rayner has written this piece basically saying Labour made a promise to leaseholders that we would fix this injustice, but ministers are currently subjected to furious lobbying from wealthy investors trying to water this manifesto commitment down. So there's effectively this tension between the two departments. And I'm told that at the moment it's with the Prime Minister, with number 10, who is the arbiter when people disagree, when his ministers disagree. He has to make the final decision.
He's going to have to make that call. So it'll be very easy. What are sort of Labour MPs? Where are they on this? Are they concerned about it? Is there an underswell of it?
I think there is concern. I think Labour MPs I've spoken to are hoping that actually they're very much on the side of kind of Steve Reid, Matthew Pennycook, who's the minister, and basically are in favour of this being capped. It was something they promised that they would do in the manifesto. One of them basically said to me that they felt like leaseholders, they themselves being a leaseholder, were sometimes treated like serfs, and they felt this was a really...
There's a medieval aspect to this, isn't there? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Before we do, let me just ask you about Angela Rayner and the whole leadership muttering that was going on. Even a few weeks ago, we had people talking about Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner. We've had Andy Burnham down this week talking about the way government is run. And yet, it's gone a bit quiet, hasn't it?
It's gone a bit quiet. I mean, what some MPs are basically saying that while Donald Trump is absolutely dominating the news agenda, they feel they sort of want to leave Keir Starmer to it. But when I suggested to a minister earlier today that maybe Keir Starmer was safe in his job because of Donald Trump and because Keir Starmer is good on world affairs, they said, I'm not sure my colleagues would agree with that. But I should also say, Andrew, that the Treasury and MCLG reject the idea there is tension and say we are working together across government to get this right.
Aggie, knock me down with a feather. Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's talk next to somebody who has campaigned tirelessly on leaseholder reform, Harry Scoffin, the housing campaigner and founder of Free Leaseholders. Harry, great to have you in the studio. For those people who are scratching their heads, just remind us what a leasehold is.
A leasehold means that when you buy a home, it's normally a flat, you don't actually own it. So you've got a landlord, even though you've got a mortgage out on something, that when you clear that mortgage, you are still a tenant. And it's a legacy of 1066, William the Conqueror nicking the land and giving it to his palace favourites. And it's a system that's built on exploitation of the common man, and we've got to get rid of it.
So forget the diggers. Underneath all of us, somebody owns the earth.
Absolutely. And Labour came to power on a manifesto not just to tackle unregulated and unaffordable ground rents, but to end the leasehold system. So to do that, you've got to stick the stake through the heart of leasehold, which is actually getting rid of ground rents. And why it's so fascinating that Angela Rayner is speaking at the last minute now is that when you look at the wording of her article, it's actually very carefully worded. It's not for peppercorn. In opposition, the Tories promised that they were going to get rid of ground rents with a zero peppercorn cap. And actually, Labour rightly rounded on them when Michael Gove wasn't able to persuade the Treasury because of these vested interests. And now the Labour government is so weak, they're struggling to even cap it at £250.
And this is to be clear, this is because wealthy property investors, owners of these leaseholds, have been lobbying ministers and saying, this is money that we are owed. We depend upon it. You can't take it away from us.
Absolutely. But the Competition and Markets Authority, under the Conservatives, found that ground rent is money for nothing. It's neither legally nor commercially necessary. So with the Prime Minister looking for a cost of living win, You want to get rid of a money-for-nothing scam.
This is an obvious one. And again, to explain to people, so they've paid their money for their house or their flat or whatever it is. They now find they have to pay money also to the leasehold. And in many cases, these are overseas-based companies who have obligations to look after the ground, look after the outside skin of the property or whatever it might be, the roofing, and just don't do it.
Absolutely. And everywhere else in the world has a fairer system kind of called common hold. They call it condominium in America, strata title. And when you buy a flat, you own it, and you're a little bit like Alan Sugar. If the managing agent is ripping you off, you say you're fired and you get in a better company. And it's funny, you've been talking about Donald Trump. It's a bit worrying for the Labour government to be on the back foot on this, where even he, a property developer by background, is saying homes are for people to live in, not corporations. And that's all we're saying. In 1900, Keir Hardie said Labour was going to emancipate Labour from landlords, and we've now got another Keir who is being swayed by all these lobbyists.
Harry, we can hear you are pumped up about this. Is there a background of in your own life that's got you going on it?
Absolutely.
Just
My
tell us.
mum is a financial slave to a freeholder based in Monaco who's a billionaire and destroying our lives, and we can't control the service charges, and that's why so many of us voted for Labour, to end this system.
Finally, is the Labour Party, by any chance, under electoral pressure, do you think, on this matter?
Absolutely. So the leader of the Green Party, Zach Polansky, came out and caused hell just a few weeks ago, saying Labour are for the lobbyists, not for the people. And that's what's got them worried ahead of the local elections, particularly in London.
Harry, I think everybody listening now understands this is a really live political issue they need to know more about. Thank you so much for coming in and explaining it to us. Prince Harry was visibly emotional in the High Court today as he described the impact the press has had on his wife, Meghan. He and 6 other high-profile claimants have accused Associated Newspapers, publishers of the Daily Mail, of unlawful information gathering, and our reporter, Helen Hodinott, was in court. Helen, great to have you back on the show again after yesterday. You were there too. We didn't expect Prince Harry to come into the witness box quite so quickly, did we?
No, he was supposed to come in tomorrow, but the schedule changed after the defence lawyer only spent an hour and a half setting out his case. He was supposed to spend a day and a half setting it out. So it all changed quite at the last minute.
There was an implication in some reports of sort of dirty tricks.
Yeah, Harry's team said that this was them trying to play tricks on the team, try to pull Harry in front of into the witness box before that he was actually prepared. But the Daily Mail's team has come back and said that that is absolutely not the case. He should have been prepared because this has been years in the making.
Now, we know that he gets angry about this. He's been pretty feisty about it, but he actually had a tear running down his cheek at one point. We haven't seen that before. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, it was a tense day in court. This was Prince Harry's chance to try to settle his score, as he sees it, against the Daily Mail. And it culminated in this moment in the witness box where he was on the verge of tears, saying this case had been a horrible experience and that by not admitting fault, the Daily Mail had made his wife's life an absolute misery.
And the burden of the case is that the Daily Mail is accused of intercepting phone calls, blagging, so-called, getting into his personal records, medical records and the rest of it. And they say, no. You had friends, so-called friends, close to you who were actually telling us everything that was going on. And therefore he presumably feels that he's being spied upon, doesn't know who to trust.
Yeah, so the Daily Mail denies these allegations, calling them preposterous and accusing Harry and the claimants of clutching at straws. In his questioning, the lawyer for the paper, Anthony White KC, suggested the journalist got the details printed in these stories about Prince Harry from his own friends, painting this really cosy picture of the journalist going to the same polo matches and bars and nightclubs that Harry went to, suggesting that it was Harry's group that were leaky. And Prince Harry said that there's no way that his own friends would have been loose-lipped around people they knew to be reporters.
But it's very interesting how all this journalism takes place, because I think one of the royal reporters of the Daily Mail was also part of the circle. She was also in some of the parties, also at the polo matches.
Yes, and she is one of the people whose articles are being pulled apart at the moment. She will be giving evidence later on in the trial where she will be essentially trying to explain where all of the information in her articles came from and try to get rid of these allegations that it was gathered illegally.
And we should remind ourselves it's not just Prince Harry who's among the claimants. There's a whole range of other famous people.
Yes, over the next few weeks, we'll be seeing Baroness Lawrence, that's Stephen Lawrence's mother, Sadie Frost, Liz Hurley, Sir Elton John. They will all be in the witness box giving their accounts.
It's going to be almost as interesting as watching Donald Trump at one of his press conferences. Final thought, the rest of the royal family clearly hate this, and we read that Prince Harry's not seeing his father or the rest of the family while he's in the UK. Is this also his reputation inside the UK on the line?
He will very much probably feel that it is. This is the third time he has taken the tabloids to court over allegations about privacy. He won against the Mirror. The Sun settled with him. So this is his chance to achieve this hat trick against British tabloid press.
A dramatic day in court today. Is he back in the witness box again tomorrow, or is that it?
He is all done now.
He's all done.
Those might be the last words we ever hear from Prince Harry in an English court of law.
Now, there's an extraordinary note to end on. Helen, thank you very, very much indeed. Thanks, all of you. The Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, gave a very powerful speech at the Davos conference this morning, telling us to prepare for a new world order. Well, I spoke to his predecessor, Michael Ignatieff, who led the Liberal Party in the 2010s, who had this warning for Europe over Greenland.
Buckle up, folks. This is going to be a very, very nasty, unpleasant ride, and it will put great strain on all European governments and on the capacity of electorates, including the British electorate, to stand the pain.
Stand the pain. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. Put your news categories in the order you'd like them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew.